built the business in 1994 to about $1.75 million. We were doing $1.7 billion a year in sales, and we were making some money. And every time we made money, the taxes on the money, 35%, took up almost all the money. And what you need to understand in a small business is when you show a profit of $100,000, that doesn't mean you got $100,000. That money all goes right back into the business to buy equipment and to buy more material and to get more space and to hire more people. And so when you have to pay $40,000, $50,000 in income tax, a lot of times I had to borrow it in order to pay it, because we don't have that kind of capital or that kind of cash in the bank, to pay that tax. In '94 was the best year we had. We had $1.75 million in sales, and we made $200,000 profit, of which we had to pay $80,000 in income tax to the federal government and $26,000 to the state. And we didn't have that, so I remember that year I had to borrow $50,000 to pay the taxes. And it just set you back. You got more debt now, and you got to pay the debt. And we were making money, and so we decided in '95 that in order to avoid the huge income tax, just a check written to the federal government, we would start giving that to the employees. So we raised everybody's pay. We started a health care plan. We started a 401k, and we started a lot of benefits for the employees so that would eat up some of that profit. I was making a good salary, and I was really counting on growing the business. That would be my retirement, just the growth in the business and the size of the assets. That was my plan. In the 15 years that I had my manufacturing business, I paid $3 million in taxes, and hardly any income tax, but $3 million in taxes in 15 years. I mean, that's a lot of taxes for a little tiny small business guy. And they kind of sneak up on you over the years because I had such a long run. They start out at 0.5%, then they go up to 0.75%, then 1%, then 1.25%, then 1.5%, and they just keep raising them, and little by little by little, and one day you wake up and you can't afford them anymore. 22 cents out of every dollar that came in had to be paid to the government before the dollar came in. So I'm talking about property tax and cat tax and inventory tax, and then you got to pay sales tax on your sales, and then if you should find some way to make a profit, they want 35% of that. Of that profit. In 2002, my last full year in that business, we made $3 million in sales, and we only made $4,000 profit. So if you plotted the graph, you could see the two lines. The sales were going up every year, and the profit was going down every year. I could see that another 2 or 3 years, the business wouldn't be profitable, and it wouldn't be hard. It would be much harder to sell it. So I sold it. I sold it for $1.4 million. I had a lot of debt for the building and so forth, mortgages, and I paid off all the debt, and I ended up with $420,000 of cash. I thought, well, that's probably going to have to be enough to retire on. So I put the money in the bank, and I talked to my accountant, and then that's when I found out what capital gains taxes were. So on top of the other 19 taxes that we had to pay every year, after 17 years of working in my business to try to make it successful so I could retire, I now had to pay of my $420,000 net proceeds after 17 years. I had to pay $147,000 in capital gains tax to the federal government and $26,000 in capital gains to the state. That left me with about $200,000, and it just wasn't enough to retire on. Right now today I have a stack on my desk of this thick of taxes I got to fill out for the end of the business. They just keep piling them on, piling them on, piling them on, and you can't make a living anymore in a small business. So you're going to see over the next 5 years, if something doesn't change dramatically, that small businesses are going to be dropping like flies all over the place. You just cannot pay these taxes. They want to control every aspect of your business, tell you how to do it, what to do, why to do it, when to do it. What do you need me for? Why don't you just run it? That's the way I feel most of the time. Why don't you just come in here and do this? They want me to put in my 120 hours a week for them so that they can get a bet. Now, if I sell my business and like my first business, if I should make a little money after 5 or 6 years, now they want, 15, 20, 30% of that. And that's going to be going up in January. So I give up. I give up. I just cannot do this any longer and work my butt off every single day so that I can ingratiate the government so they can give my money away to people that don't do nothing. And that's the other side of that coin is that infuriation that we get, which you see in the Tea Parties and the 9/12 groups, is that why should I work so hard so dozen other people don't have to work at all? And that's not fair. I mean, when I hire people, it's like making a contract with them. You agree to work for me and I agree to pay you. And that's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's always worked in America. I got the ideas, I got the willpower, I got the talent. I create the business and I hire people to work and I pay them for their time. And because maybe they don't have the ability to start a business or the capital or whatever, but they want to take all that away from me and just give it to them. Okay, then who's going to create the jobs? Who's going to create the jobs? Nobody. And so that's why socialism always fails. It always fails. You run out of other people's money. You know the old saying. And so as people like me give up and just quit, who will do it? Who will pick up the slack? Who will pay all these taxes? The big corporations won't. They know all kinds of ways to get out from paying them, and our Congress helps them do it. They're complicit in having big corporations pay no taxes. And so something's got to change in America. And I can just tell you that the nature of socialism, the nature of liberalism in America, it's got no future. It just can't work here. And yet we're going to keep trying to drive that square peg into that round hole and just keep trying to make it work. And so go ahead on with yourself. I'm done. I quit.
My name is Ken George, and I've been in the manufacturing business since 1984. With the following presentation, I would like to give you a little understanding of how manufacturing has changed over the last 20 years, and how this change has caused our current unemployment situation, while at the same time, how it is destroying our entire economic future. So let's begin. Let's go back to the year 1991. We're going to talk about a fictitious manufacturing company and a fictitious retail company. The manufacturing company we're going to talk about is ABC Manufacturing. ABC makes widgets. They produce 1.5 million widgets per year. The widgets wholesale to a retailer for $4 each. This gives ABC $6 million in total sales. They have 100 employees making widgets, each earning $15 an hour. Remember, this is 1991, and this is a very good job. This gives ABC a $3 million labor cost, which makes the labor cost per widget $2. On that $3 million of labor, $840,000 is paid to the federal government in the form of personal income tax. The balance of $2,160,000 goes back into the economy in the form of what we call disposable income. It is used for things like mortgage payments, groceries, clothes, debt payments, whatever the worker needs or wants. This $2,160,000 goes to help the economy prosper by feeding other businesses. For our purposes, the material needed to make a widget is $1. So together, the cost of labor and material to make a widget is $3. Overhead for any company is a large part of the cost, but for this presentation, we are ignoring overhead as it varies widely from company to company. Hopefully you can see that since ABC sells the widgets for $4 and has a $3 cost to manufacture, they make 25% profit. So on their $6 million in sales, they earn $1.5 million in profit. On this profit, ABC pays $525,000 in corporate income tax. The remainder of the profit goes back into the company. It can go for expanding the business, new and better equipment, expanding inventory, employee benefits, savings, or God forbid a cash bonus for the owner. One thing to keep in mind is that we are talking about a small business. Generally a single owner, partners, or maybe a family business, but rarely will this kind of business have shareholders or have publicly traded stock. Small businesses are almost always privately held. Now let's move to the retail business. This is the part of the model that sells the widgets to individual consumers like you. Let's call our retailer Megalomart. Megalomart sells all 1.5 million widgets every year. All the production of ABC. Megalomart sells the widgets for $5 each, giving Megalomart $7.5 million in sales. Although Megalomart has lots of employees, we are only concerned with the 10 they have that receive, stock, and sell widgets. Retail employees, although important, they don't have or require the skill set that is needed in manufacturing. So Megalomart's employees only make $8 per hour. Megalomart's total labor cost is $160,000, which yields $24,000 of personal income tax and $136,000 of disposable income. So what is Megalomart's cost? They pay ABC $4 each, and their individual labor cost per widget is 11 cents, giving them a total cost of $4.11. At a selling price of $5, it gives Megalomart a gross profit of $1,340,000, on which they pay $469,000 in corporate income tax and $867,000 of net earnings. Now, in a large retailer like Megalomart, that $867,000 can go back into the business as new buildings, new equipment, or inventory, or in many cases will go to pay dividends to shareholders or executive bonuses. By the way, when the earnings are used to pay these types of things, there is more tax applied by the federal government, either capital gains tax when paid out as dividends, or personal income tax when paid out as bonuses. This also applies to the small business as well. Okay, here we see the basic manufacturing model in 1991. Why did I pick 1991 as a starting point? Because in 1992, NAFTA was enacted, which will change this model forever. The business model you see here was the basic business model used in America since the Industrial Revolution. Entrepreneurs start a business, hire workers, buy raw materials, and make something they know something about. Other entrepreneurs start retail businesses to service the consumers and to fill needs within the economy. This was the American model. Everything you see here was American. The materials, the labor, the management, the building, the equipment, the raw materials, and the product. It worked pretty well for almost 100 years. Now let's fast forward to 1996. I chose 1996 because this is when the economy started to feel the effects of NAFTA. Before we move on, for those of you that don't know what NAFTA is, it is an acronym for the North American Free Trade Alliance. What it did was to make Canada, the U.S., and Mexico a free trade zone. It removed all tariffs on foreign goods going into and out of these countries. Prior to NAFTA, there were import tariffs on goods coming and going. These tariffs were set at rates that would basically reduce demand for a foreign good by leveling the cost of labor or material with the equivalent product made in the other country. They would be 10, 20, 30, or 100% depending on the product. So in effect, for an American manufacturer, a tariff made importing less profitable than making the product at home. During that time, a promise was made to the American worker when NAFTA was enacted. We were told that if we allowed this free trade, that our southern partner would be able to grow their economy and a middle class would emerge in Mexico. This emergence would spark demand for American products, and it would be good for American manufacturing. Let me say here that this was either a lie or a huge naive miscalculation. All it did was transfer our manufacturing to Mexico, and a middle class has never emerged. Let's go back to our model and see just how our two companies fared during the beginning of NAFTA. Competitors were beginning to undercut ABC's price. For a few years, they tried cutting overtime, cutting benefits, buying faster and better equipment, and stopping 401k matching funds, or any number of things to become more efficient. Some of you may remember this period. We were told how productive the American worker was. Each year in the mid to late 90s, we had huge productivity increases. Well, eventually, it wasn't enough to just improve productivity. Wholesalers were emerging that just bought a foreign widget and sold it directly to the retailer. So ABC didn't really have a choice. They had to find a lower cost. They find a Mexican manufacturer and show them how to make widgets. They now can buy the widget in Mexico for $1.80. This price includes all the labor and all the material. As an aside, this move is also going to affect the American suppliers of materials to the ABC Manufacturing Company. This change allows ABC to lay off 90 workers. They keep 10 to receive, handle, package, invoice, and so forth. This leaves ABC with 10 employees. They still pay them $15 an hour, which gives them a labor cost of 20 cents per widget. ABC's lower cost is now $300,000 instead of $3 million. This in turn reduces the amount of personal income tax to $84,000, and the disposable income going back into the American economy is reduced from over $2 million to $216,000. But what happens to ABC's profits? In order to compete, ABC has to reduce its price to Megalomart to $3. But not so fast. By buying widgets instead of manufacturing them, ABC's cost drops to $2. This drops ABC's sales to $4.5 million. And the profit? It stays exactly the same. They still make $1.5 million profit. They still pay $525,000 in taxes. And they still have $975,000 left to grow the company. So even though their sales have been reduced, their profit, taxes, and return all remain the same. So far, sounds like a pretty good move. Well, let's look at Megalomart and see how this change affects their business. ABC now offers widgets to Megalomart for $3. Their labor cost is the same. They still are selling 1.5 million widgets. Their total cost now is $3.11. Something a little unfair is about to occur, though. Megalomart is going to reduce the price to the consumer, but not by the $1 that their cost was reduced by. They lower the price 50 cents to $4.50. For the consuming public, we're happy. We just got a better price on widgets. This drops Megalomart's sales to $6,750,000. But watch what happens to their profit. It goes up to $2,085,000, which causes them to pay more corporate tax, $729,000, and return more to their shareholders or executives, $1,355,000. So for Megalomart, things actually got better. Profits are higher, so the stock price goes up. Executive got bonuses, so everybody's happy. ABC is happy. Megalomart is happy. The consumer is happy. Wall Street is happy. Everybody is happy. That is, except those 90 people that lost their jobs. They're not so happy. But oh well, it's only 90 people. They will find another job someday. I know. They can be retrained. Let me take a minute and talk about the biggest difference between ABC and Megalomart. I explained earlier how a small business is structured. They are not publicly traded, so they don't have a stock price to worry about, but a company like Megalomart represents what we have fondly come to call the big box store. Huge chains that sell everything from apples to zoo animals. They have millions of shareholders and hundreds of executives whose compensation is, in many cases, tied to the share price. So profitability and growth are exceedingly important to a large corporation. Looking at this model, we see how manufacturing was doing business in the 90s. It worked for most people, but not for those pesky American workers. Now let's fast forward again to 2002. 6 years later, and we see a new model begin to emerge. The giant retailers, in league with the government, find they can set up foreign subsidiaries in other countries and buy widgets directly from those subsidiaries. In 1989, we find the government debating MFN for China. MFN is a trade term that means most favored nation. Any country that has MFN status is able to export goods to the United States at very low or no tariffs. This arrangement used to be made between two countries, but with the advent of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, the U.S. signed an agreement that in effect gave up our sovereignty to the WTO. So any country that belongs to the WTO automatically gets MFN from the U.S. So Megalomart decides to buy from the cheapest source they can, and that, of course, is China. Enter Cha-Ching Limited, a subsidiary of Megalomart. By the way, there are very lucrative tax laws that a subsidiary enjoys. Even though an American corporation owns the subsidiary, they avoid paying American taxes on their profits. In fact, there are so many new tax laws that benefit foreign subsidiaries, it would make most Americans vomit. But that's a story for another time. So now that Megalomart is buying from their subsidiary, Cha-Ching Limited, they will need to hire more workers to pick up the slack for what ABC was doing. So they hire 10 more people to do purchasing, customs, receiving, and packaging. So Megalomart hires the 10 more people. But remember, ABC was paying their people $15 an hour. Megalomart only pays $8 an hour. But be that as it may, Megalomart's labor cost goes up to $320,000, which increases the personal income tax paid to $48,000 and the disposable income for Megalomart employees to $272,000. Now, take a wild guess what happens to ABC Manufacturing. Great guess. They go bankrupt. The last workers at the ABC Manufacturing Company are now out of work. Ironically, this even hurts Mexico because those people that were in Mexico making widgets for ABC are now also out of work. So how does all this affect our model? Megalomart is now able to buy widgets from their subsidiary, Cha-Ching Limited, for $1.74. Their labor cost increases to 22 cents, making their total cost of a widget $1.96, down from $3. Megalomart can once again lower the price of widgets. The consumer is delirious with joy. They will have another great Christmas. The price of widgets is now $4. What does this do to Megalomart's profit? Wow! It's amazing. It actually more than doubles from the 1991 model of $1,340,000 to $2,910,000, on which they pay over $1 million in income tax and return almost $2 million to their shareholders. This causes Megalomart's stock to go through the roof. Megalomart is America's golden child. They are making money for their shareholders, they are creating jobs, they are reducing prices on widgets and everything else they sell. I even heard that Megalomart is doing a great service for the poor by keeping prices low on so many things. But how is this possible? Where did all this money come from? They still only sell 1.5 million widgets. They haven't created anything new, but yet they have doubled their profit on 20% less sales. I know, it must be a miracle. No, not a miracle. Do you remember this slide from the 1991 model? Here's where it came from, right here. $2,160,000 of disposable income from American workers. Nice, nice. So this is the model we were using in the early 2000s. Big box stores buying all they could from China and small businesses that used to manufacture going out of business. But prices were reduced, and Americans that had jobs were enjoying every minute of it. Now let's take this one step further. Let's jump forward to 2008, when the housing market collapsed, and this situation was exposed. We began to feel the impact of these job losses and this loss of income to a huge part of our workforce. Sales begin to decline slightly for Megalomart. Widget sales go from 1.5 million to 1.3 million, which dropped their sales to $5.2 million. People that once worked in a manufacturing company who crowded into construction or some other housing boom industry are now out of work too and no longer buying widgets. So as the sales fall, profits drop. They go from 2.9 million down to 2.5 million. Still respectable, but not what Wall Street expected. We see a decrease in their stock value. So how can Megalomart keep its profits up and its stock price high if their sales are dropping? That's an easy one, because all large corporations apply one principle when profits are suffering: lay off workers. So Megalomart lays off 5 employees. This drops their labor cost to $240,000, which drops the taxes to $36,000, and the disposable income to $204,000. What does this do to Megalomart's cost of widgets? It only drops the cost 4 cents. 4 cents. But it does increase profits by some $50,000. But this action doesn't get that pesky stock price rising, because you see, Megalomart can't lay off enough people to offset the lost revenue. So they do the only thing left to do, which is raise the price 5%. This action not only makes the profit go up, but to all-time record levels. Again, Wall Street is happy and the stock price soars. So there you have it, the model we have today. The trouble is, this can't continue. An economy cannot grow by laying off workers and raising prices. It must use its resources and make things. We are almost at the end of the use of this model. So let's look at the cumulative effect to the economy since NAFTA and MFN status for China took hold of these 2 companies. Remember, this presentation only represents 2 companies, 2 American companies, but it can be multiplied thousands of times throughout the country. At our start point in 1991, we see our 2 companies had combined sales of $13 million. Combined, they had 110 employees. They paid $1,858,000 in taxes and returned $4,138,000 to the economy. By 96, prices had fallen, so sales dropped off to $11,250,000. This is on the same quantity of goods. This begins an economic occurrence called deflation. What happens to employment? It goes from 110 people employed down to 20. Wow, interesting. Tax revenue also declines to $1.3 million, and the biggest change is in disposable income to the workers, from over $4 million down to under $2.7 million. Now, in 2002, sales drop off dramatically to $6 million. This is because ABC no longer exists. The sales are now in the form of a trade deficit, money leaving America. But that's okay, because we still have our 20 employees. The tax revenues drop even further because we don't have those sales, profits, or employees at ABC anymore. And disposable income is down to just over $2.1 million. Now we move on to 2009. Sales are dropping still further, but now for another reason. That decline in disposable income causes purchasing power to fail, which in turn causes employment to decline, tax revenues to fall, and disposable income to continue its slide. So by looking at the entire picture of these 2 companies over the last 20 years, we see that the biggest impact on our economy was in the growth. It declines almost 50%. This not only had a huge impact on ABC, but it takes a huge toll on many, many other businesses. Not only ABC's material suppliers, but the guy that sold them the coffee, their office supplies, the owner's vehicles, and the lawn maintenance people. Megalomart's temporary success also has an impact. It drives smaller retailers out of business or forces them to reduce their prices and profitability. The point here is that free trade in the early 90s started a chain of events that has changed our economy drastically for the worse, in my opinion. But I want to assure you, even though it is my opinion, I do have supporting evidence beyond my 30 years of experience in manufacturing. It was interesting that I put together this presentation first, before I looked at statistics. I was amazed at how the national statistical data mirrored my findings. This chart shows in red our imports, in green our exports, and blue is our trade deficit. I added the black lines to indicate the years I used in my presentation. The chart shows how imports were sharply up in 91 and 96, but so were exports. This is a good thing. Exports offset the impact imports have on the overall economy. For example, if ABC could have found something to manufacture that they could have exported, they would have stayed in business. But since labor, taxes, and materials are more costly here than anywhere else in the world, that would seem highly unlikely, and the chart reflects this. By 2002, you see imports continuing their rise, but not as drastically as they did in the 90s, while exports begin a more rapid decline. This causes the trade deficit to fall off the chart. Here we see a chart that follows the changes to foreign subsidiary laws from 1950 through 2010. This is how the government has been complicit in the steady decline in manufacturing. When the megalomarts of the world tell Congress to jump, they ask how high. Not that this is sinister or corrupt, but what's good for Megalomart is not necessarily good for America. These laws not only encourage companies to set up companies offshore, but many of them reward those companies for doing it. This graph depicts the gradual decline in manufacturing jobs. Even prior to the early 90s, manufacturing jobs were on the decline. Much of that decline was due to automation and increases in productivity. Wages and disposable income were increasing at that time. Notice the difference in the shape of the line after 1985. It is a perfectly straight line that will continue its drop right off the chart if something doesn't change. And this final chart shows the real Megalomart stock price. Look at the sharp increase from 1998 to 2001 and how it's held steady ever since. So what's the bottom line? In the election that just passed, a lot of new people were put into office. The entire campaign never broached the topic of globalization. We have been led to believe that free trade and globalization is good for America and important to not only continue but expand upon. In my study, I conclude that globalization is the single cause of our economic collapse. Not the housing bubble, not the banking crisis, and certainly not climate change. We must acquire and use our own resources to make things in America. If we don't, we are destined to be a debtor nation and one in steady decline. I hope as we face the coming presidential election, we will focus our representatives on this glaring weakness in our economy. Like Ross Perot said in 1992, we can hear that giant sucking sound, by which he meant the rest of the world taking the wealth of America away.